Like, I remember covering that and saying to my editor, like, I'm sorry, but I don't even understand what an algorithmic stablecoin is and how it went tits up. And he was like,
Welcome to Beyond the Beat, a podcast by Chain Store, the agency to elevate your status in crypto. I'm your host, Pedro, and every week I'll be talking to the people in crypto media. We'll be telling their stories, their failures, their lessons, and whatever tips or tricks they've got up their sleeves.
Let's get it going. Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Beyond the Beat, your favorite media podcast, I'm sure. Cheers to all the millions out there who haven't heard of us, but who will. I'm joined by one of my favorite journalists in the crypto industry, a true crypto hack, Matt Salvo from Decrypt. Thank you so much, man, for coming on.
thank you for having me. I'm a big fan of this podcast.
Well, that's exciting then. It's always exciting, I suppose, to be on the scene or on camera with something that you listen to. Like, I've got a few podcasts that I listen to that I think to myself, oh, it'd be great to get invited to something like that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, no, it's great. I remember when you told me, you floated the idea of this podcast and I shot it down. I don't know if you remember that conversation. I was just like, Pedro, what a daft idea. No one's going to listen to this. And now, now I
Here
look,
you are.
now I'm the idiot. Yeah.
Now you're being daft and you're just having
Finding
to,
God. Yeah.
going back on your own words.
Yeah. But great job. No, I'm happy to be on.
No, yeah, I'm glad that I've made you go full 180 on your stance and go from this is silly to I want to be on it, and here you are. So yeah, where do we start? I'm gonna ask you a question that's gonna seem very vague, and I bet you've heard this one before, but why are you a journalist?
Yeah, good question. I don't really know how to answer. I kind I kind of just fell into journalism. I think like like a lot of journalists I know, um, I enjoyed writing. I wrote for the university newspaper while I was studying English, and like started off with like doing music journalism. Um, I didn't think I'd ever be in the world of news, but yeah, I ended up doing a journalism course with a news agency in the UK, and yeah, the rest is history, really. Um, I'd probably say, like, after doing a couple of internships, I was sort of persuaded into going into the world of news. But yeah, just kept at it, and I'm still here. Um, Surprisingly, despite the fact that a lot of my friends in the industry have gone to the dark side of public relations and marketing, I'm still, you know, being a filthy hack, covering the incredibly strange and fast-moving, exhausting world of crypto.
Yeah, no, we'll dive into the darker side of the industry in due time, because we do have quite a few PR people who tune into this.
All right.
But yeah, what drew you into becoming a journalist, and then what drew you to sort of, or what kept you in this line of work?
Yeah, I mean, I was always interested in current affairs and news. And, as I said, I started off like writing mainly just like music reviews. That's how I got started for like magazines and stuff. But an editor I worked with, I did an internship with a national newspaper in the UK. And the editor was like, yeah, you should go into news. So I ended up doing that and started off covering like general news for like local newspapers in the UK, and then a news agency. covering fast-paced breaking news for like the national newspapers. And then I came to Latin America because that was always what I wanted to do. Learn Spanish and travel around Latin America. And like journalism for me is just a trade. I disagree with those who say it's a profession. Like I've always thought it's a trade, like building.
What's the difference between the two?
Well, like a profession is something you need to study for, whereas a trade is something you can learn on the job. That's my understanding.
Okay.
So like building, carpentry, plumbing. Whereas being like a financial analyst or a lawyer, you have to go to university and study. I don't think you need to go to university to be a journalist. I mean, one of the best journalists, like ex-colleagues of mine I know, she didn't even go to university. She just got a job straight away on a newspaper. And then, I mean, she's like one of the biggest, well, she's a great journalist in the UK. So yeah, I just see it as a trade that I brought with me to Latin America. And, you know, I've covered other things along the way, but crypto has been like my main beat, as it were, since about 2019. And
what drew you? I mean, I suppose the strangeness and the maybe fast pace, like news cycle of things drew you in, or was there anything that you thought to yourself like, nah, this is, or was it just like happenstance and got offered a job, or somebody was like, hey, have you ever thought about writing about this? Bitcoin seems interesting, maybe it's up your alley, and then you're like, you know what? I definitely don't have better things to do with myself than to write about crypto, so I'll give it a go.
Yeah, it was a bit of that. Yeah, I mean, I a lot of journalists I know seem to just fall into like a niche, and I feel like I fell into this one. I had a friend who worked in the crypto industry, and he was like, "Oh, you should write about this space. Like, there's not many people doing it, or there's not many like journalists doing it." And I started doing it for one publication, and then started freelancing for a number of publications, and then got, you know, the full-time job where I'm at now. But yeah, I mean, it's a difficult industry to cover because it's so hard to really follow because it moves so fast and understand. I find like a lot of journalists I meet are either, or I've definitely heard from editors and people that hire in this space that, you know, it's hard to find a good journalist and someone that understands the space. It's normally one or the other. You know, I meet some, you know, there are some crypto journalists or journalists covering the space who know nothing about crypto, at least from a practical standpoint, like have never bought crypto or played around with the technology. And then they're like amazing writers, and then there are like journalists that aren't very good writers, but their technical knowledge is great. I guess you could say that with other niches as well. You know, there's other journalists who are excellent at like finding stories and talking to people, but are not very good writers, or very good writers who are just not good at, you know, digging and finding stories. Like,
where do you land yourself? I know it's hard to pinpoint because I don't know how I'm going to deflect the question that I probably asked myself onto you.
Yeah, I mean, I know nothing about crypto and I can't write, so
obviously you work at one of the biggest media publications in crypto.
Just flagging it. No, no. I hope that, I mean, understanding crypto like properly is just like, I mean,
it's mind-boggling. Like,
yeah,
the amount of technical stuff that you need to know, like even within like a specific network, there's like understanding, for example, ZK proofs, and then also understanding like the intricacies of Bitcoin mining is just like completely different worlds. Yeah. And that sometimes gets overlooked by how much you really need to understand what's going on, and something happens in one realm or the other, and story gets tossed into your lap. It's like, you need to write this up. And sure, you can write up something, you've got technical knowledge on like, ZK proofs or privacy or I don't know, any other area of the industry, and then something else gets tossed your way. It's like, got to write about this, but it's really not easy.
No, it's not. And I really don't envy like the writers covering like in depth the DeFi space. Like I started doing a bit of that, at the start of my career, and it's just, I mean, it was really difficult. I had an editor at the time who would really push me to go deep into like the stories and explain like the technicalities of that incredibly just weird and experimental sphere of the crypto industry, and it was tough. So I mean, if you can get your head round, certain um, subspheres of the crypto industry, like DeFi or, as you said, Bitcoin mining, and make it succinct and easy to understand for like the average Joe, then you're doing a great job. But it is tough.
So what would you say is like your favorite part of the industry to cover? Like because I'm sure, because you cover a lot on markets, and you cover, I
Mhm.
guess, the general industry, but you cover a lot of markets.
Yeah.
Is that your favorite part of what you get to cover, or is there something else that you like to write about, you like to research, and that maybe you'd like to write more about?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say like markets has been like something I was pushed into that I've really enjoyed like writing about. I've learned a lot, and especially like the ETF space. Yeah, it sounds boring, but that's, it's, again, I've learned loads, and covering that space is difficult. But I'd say like, yeah, I really enjoyed covering all the bankruptcies like Celsius, FTX. That was great when that was happening. I mean, it
Is
was
that your
it
more
was
morbid side coming out, watching
yeah, no, I mean, it
watching the
wasn't.
industry go into shambles?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't great for I've got friends who lost money in FTX, so that's not great for them, obviously, but interesting to cover. But yeah, no, El Salvador, story. I was there for Decrypt in 2021. When Bukele like first announced that he was going to turn it into a Bitcoin state, essentially. That was very interesting, and that's something I'd like to continue covering, because I think that's one of the most interesting and weirdest stories in Latin America. Most Bitcoiners I know talk about El Salvador. At some point, it will come up in the conversation, so I think it's relevant. Whether or not it's working as an experiment is another story. But yeah, Latin America, crime, bankruptcies, and markets and the ETF stories are all what I'm enthusiastic about writing, and what luckily I've been pushed into doing by Decrypt.
Do you because Decrypt has like quite like a cultural, or like a, I mean, you at Decrypt there's a bunch of different areas. Like gaming is pretty strong, culture is
Yeah.
being strong. You guys are pushing AI really strong now. Um,
We're doing
yeah,
everything.
you guys are covering everything. What do you think about that sort of like catch-all media outlet?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to do. It's ambitious, but it's hard to do. I mean, if you can pull it off and bring in the hits, like great. But I think every outlet is trying to work out what exactly works. And I think Decrypt is one of those outlets that's like saying, let's try everything in the emerging tech space. And it seems to be working. People are very interested in AI and crypto and gaming. So, it's paying off, but it's tough. Knowing what to cover and what not to cover. People's attention spans now are so like short, and being just a crypto news pub can be difficult, from what I've heard from other journalists working elsewhere.
Yeah, no, totally. Um, Parenthesis to this whole thing, and sorry, Lucas, for adding on the editing, but just a reminder to keep your head in the frame a little bit back, because you're getting gobbled up at the bottom.
I'm getting too close.
Yeah. I mean, I know you want to get really close to me, which is totally fine. That's that would be funny if you just did
How's this,
that. Like
Pedro?
that works, man. That definitely works.
This is better.
Yeah, because otherwise, like your chin gets chopped off.
Okay.
But yeah, looping back into it, I don't remember where we're at. So technical difficulties aside, we were just about to start grilling Decrypt. Not just kidding.
Yeah.
To anybody from
Decrypt
Decrypt there.
is the best publication in the space. Everything else sucks.
Decrypt is the best tablet in Decrypt. Let's say that. But yeah, looping back into it. So I mean, I agree. I think that I guess that's like a general crypto issue. Like everybody is just like testing different products, services, ideas out and seeing what sticks. Like I don't think from media outlets to products to startups, I don't think anyone has found product market fit except for like a few choice like protocols, networks, things like that. But yeah, when it comes to media, it's interesting, and I feel like because the media landscape is shifting substantially, and like now social media has such an important piece, and now podcasts are becoming like a media outlet in themselves, and like people are. I don't know. We were talking before screen about the idea of headlines, and like people just like jump on a headline and they won't even read the article. So must be really hard to like sell space or sell publicity on a website that people have to read because nobody's reading.
It's funny you say that because like literally a guy I know who works in marketing was just like, I don't even read news stories anymore. I just read the headline.
He must be a pleasure to talk to.
I think he was a bit of a muppet, as you like to use that word. Yeah,
but, I do like to use that word. Yeah, yeah, I do. Yeah.
I hope he doesn't do this podcast or listen to the
podcast. Well, now people know that that's how I treat them behind their backs. So, but yeah, the headlines is such a funny one because I'm terrible at writing headlines. I think I'm getting better. I hope I'm getting better. I expect to be getting better. But
hopefully.
But it's such a tough one to master and to just like because you see headlines come out and there are people who are really good at headlines. And like you were saying, like behind the scenes, there are people who specialize in like headline writing.
Yeah. And no, it's an art. It definitely is. And like I'll often write a story and like leave the headline till last and then kind of rush it. And like I think probably the best thing you can do is sort of treat a headline like your lead and take time on it and write, make it good and then not go back and edit it. But, a journalist I worked with in one of like my first internships, he was like a foreign editor at a national newspaper. He was a really old school hack, but like the first job I think he got was working for a top newspaper in the UK, just writing headlines. And I mean that just shows you how important it is. Like that kind of job doesn't exist anymore. But I mean, headlines, you've got to really. It takes a while to master the craft, I think. And
do you believe in like the idea that because there's a lot of copywriters out there who think that you should start writing the headline before you should even start writing the article. Do you agree with that?
I think that's a good idea. Yeah, like the lead. There was a guy I worked with once who was like, he was a lecturer at a university for journalism, but he said like, when you write an intro or a lead to a story, you should make it perfect, and then you shouldn't go back to it, because once you go back to it and when you start writing the rest of the story and you go back and change the intro, he believed that you would then ruin it. And I think that's probably the same with headlines. You've got to like make it perfect first, and then the rest of the story will flow. But
what what makes a perfect headline for you? Like when you look at a headline and you think this is a great headline, that's obviously not been written by neither you or I, but
Yeah.
somebody else wrote a great headline. Yeah, what makes it like something like that? I wish I had written that.
Yeah, I mean, it's got to grab your attention, and make you want to click on the story now, or read the newspaper. I say that. Yeah, who reads newspapers these days? But yeah, it's just got to grab your attention and make you want to read the story, without like being a lie or inaccurate. I've written headlines before, and I've had people sources afterwards, say, what's that headline all about? That's misleading. And I've been like, oh shit, I didn't write it. Sorry, that was my editor. But yeah, no, it's definitely something, you've got to really think about what words work and SEO as well, what's going to click, what's going to show up in the search engine.
Do you use like do you think about SEO when you're writing about articles? Like I've got some like a reasonable knowledge of SEO, I'd say, and I'll be checking in on it every now and then. But when it comes to writing articles, I wouldn't say it's something that's particularly on my mind.
Yeah,
When it's a news article, if I was writing like a blog post or something that's, I don't know, like slightly different styling with a slightly different focus for a slightly different audience, then maybe I do a little bit more SEO, like
yeah.
sprinkling it on. Do you do it though?
No, I'll admit now that I don't. It's not something I think about. I mean, I just said it, but yeah,
Just in conversation, never in practice.
yeah, it's not something I probably think about enough. Like I don't know. I guess you have to know what words are clicking and what words are trending,
Hmm.
and then you try and use them in the story. But I just don't really focus on that probably as much as I should.
I don't know. I feel like SEO sort of takes away from a little bit of the writing. It becomes a bit too robotic because you're answering at the end of the day to sort of like what a big collection of data is telling you. Like, sure, there's people that are searching for it, but they're just like random keywords that have like different difficulty measurements or like different like high scores and things like that. But it's not necessarily like well crafted into making it like a nice, entertaining, fluid read.
Yeah,
At
yeah,
least
no,
that's how I look at it.
yeah, no, it might be too forced perhaps in some instances, but yeah, I don't know. Maybe soon, Pedro, everything will be robotic, and all articles will be churned out by AI and will be doomed. So
I was talking about this with a friend today. Are you scared of AI taking your job?
no, not really. Um, I'm more scared of AI doing other sort of bad things in the world. I think it taking my job is the least of my worries. Um, for now, I mean, I'm sure if I lost my job and like my boss was like, "Sorry, we're cutting back writers because we just got this wonderful AI product that can do things better," and I'd probably be upset. But um, yeah, I'm sure I'd find other opportunities fairly quickly. Well, I hope I would, even if that would be, I don't know, selling fruit and veg on a market. What is it journalists do if they can't cut it in journalism? But no, AI is to me is more worrying about surveillance states and misinformation, disinformation, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, it's it's funny you say that because I don't necessarily think of AI when it comes to misinformation or disinformation. I feel like it has other purposes and it's maybe dumbing us down in some ways.
Hmm.
It's like adding on or yeah, just like changing and shifting the way like the job market is looking or things get created. And like, well, I guess now that you say it or thinking about it now, yeah, there's definitely like, I guess fake news is also within the category of misinformation or disinformation.
Yeah,
And so now we're seeing like these like AI models coming up or like deep fakes, and that's all AI. I hadn't really thought
that's
about it
right.
just now. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll hold my hand up now and say that I don't use. I mean, I probably use. Yeah, definitely use different types of AI for other things, but generative AI like ChatGPT, I'm not using for work at the moment.
That's not what you said behind the scenes, though.
Yeah, just sitting back, sipping on a beer, and shouting at the computer screen. Right, all my
Audio to text, man. It comes with so
yeah,
many issues. It comes with so many issues, audio to text.
yeah, that's yeah. No, there is. I'm not going to name him. But there is a podcaster I heard who said that he only uses AI now for like writing stuff and like sending emails and whatever, doing most of his work. And he said he was worried that it would make him, you know, lazy and worse at his job over the long term. But I mean, I don't use the personal assistant AI, the AI personal assistant yet. And I've got like colleagues and friends who say they do, and it's like a lifesaver. So maybe I should jump on that. But I'm still, you know, typing and using my brain as much as I can.
Yeah, I'm old school in that way as well. Like I'm a big fan of writing stuff myself. Like that's the reason why I got into writing, and I also fell into journalism, but like I used to
Yeah,
be a book translator and then just like general writer and then my own newsletter and all that sort of stuff. And yeah, I feel like there's something that gets taken away when you use AI. And I know that there's the typical like cliche, like there's going to be writers that are going to be much more successful than you because they can write more and they can get more, like
mm-hmm.
they can churn it out more. Sorry, more, and quantity just goes over the roof and all that sort of stuff. But like you lose on so much quality if any, even people who don't read that much can clearly tell when something's been written by an AI. And then
Mm-hmm.
you've got the other concern, like going back to the SEO, like not many people know this, or at least when I heard this stat, I didn't know it. And it's like human generated content outranks AI generated content on Google by like 94 to 95%. So like you have a lot of content that's getting written by AI, but then it's getting outranked by human beings. And so, but we live in this sort of like, and we've spoken about this a lot, like this sort of endless churn of the news cycle. And we just like push out everything you can as much as you can, as quick as you can. But
Yeah,
then, so there's obviously companies that are pushing all that in AI because you just can't squeeze that much content out of a human. But then
yeah,
it's losing out on like deliverability or views, but then there's this idea that you just need to be constantly like throwing stuff at the readers, throwing stuff into like the endless vortex that is
mm-hmm.
the internet and like the content industrial complex.
Yeah. That's a good way of describing it. Yeah, yeah. I don't know what the answer is really. I think, yeah, I hope that you know, good writers and journalists are still their skills are still going to be needed. Um, but when you think about it though, you know, there was an old school journalist I worked with who was like, I remember him telling me that back in the day when he didn't have like he was like working in the 80s and 90s, early 90s, and he would like go to a court case and he didn't have a laptop, so he would phone up his editor in the office and give them the copy by the phone, and then the editor would turn it into a story. So that's kind of like an AI tool in some ways, when you think about it. You know, you're using another person, another brain to put together a story. Maybe AI will just be like this tool we use to bang out like quick market stories and then like the deeper dives and longer reads and things that take a bit more investigation and thought will be the ones we don't really use AI for.
Yeah, I mean, I like disclaimer. I'm not against AI. I don't think AI is necessary. Like, it's not per se something bad.
Mhm.
But I do think that like people are lazy, right? And
Yeah.
like nowadays we read things as social media usually gives it in like small chunks. And
Mhm.
so most AI pieces aren't going to be fleshed out, and they're just going to be like they're going to be adding into that pattern of thought, or
Yeah.
that way of reading. And then when you run across like a longer form piece, which this has happened to me, like sometimes I'll see a longer form piece that looks really interesting and that I want to read, but it just looks really long, and it'll say like underneath 17-minute read, and like my brain rotted social
You,
media brain rotted brain is just going to be like, oh,
you
that's
just you
hectic.
just you just say fuck that and you start looking at TikTok. That's what you do, isn't it, Pedro?
I mean, I read on TikTok nowadays,
Oh,
with the subtitles, it's like reading.
what is reading now? I don't even read. I
Yeah.
No, I'm joking. I do read. I try to read as much as possible. But yeah, no, you're right. It's difficult to know what way things are going to go. It'd be interesting to know how many newsrooms are telling their writers to use AI.
Ooh,
Um,
that's a good question.
yeah, because I have heard sort of whispers of that, but I've never been told myself, "Hey, are you using AI?" I did use it a couple of times in the past year, ChatGPT, to scan like long documents, like SEC documents, like summarize this, but I haven't done that in a while. But that's what I see as like a useful way of using the tech.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I've never heard of that, or I've never heard of. I've got independent content creator friends who have been like, man, why aren't you using AI? But
Hmm.
I've never heard of like newsroom mandates to be like, hey, we should be using AI. I know that like at the Defiant, we've implemented this thing called Deep News. That's like an AI news aggregator, and it'll just punch
Right.
out like a small like blurb. And I know that you
Hmm.
guys do something similar.
Yeah, yeah, too.
Um,
Which
but
is
I,
that's a good way of using it. Can you just
yeah,
hold on, pause 1 second?
I usually say, but you are a Muppet.
I Yeah. Um, what was we saying, Pedro?
We were on like a massive AI rant.
Yeah.
Like we went down an AI rabbit hole. So
We could continue. Like, I mean, remember, like there were jobs going about 9, 10 years ago for sub editors, certainly in the UK. So people who would organise the text on a screen before it was printed in a newspaper and make sure that things fit in boxes and looks nice and spotted errors. I don't even know those jobs really exist anymore. So just like headline writers, I guess sub editors have disappeared. Like we've got to do that ourselves as journalists. And I remember working on a local newspaper, like a guy who mentored us all the reporters would say, like, now journalism's harder than ever. This was like 2015. So what, 8 years ago, 9 years ago, he was like, um, being a journalist is harder than ever. You have to think about everything. You have to take pictures yourself. You have to even shoot video yourself. You have to write headlines, edit it, make it look pretty on the page. Even some cases do podcasting on the side, like what you're doing. I mean, it's just when, when, how can you have this
when
many?
does it end?
When does it end? Yeah. Um,
There
you
is
tell
no
me.
end. There
There
is
is
no
no.
end.
There is no
Now,
end.
have you? So this is. I think this is a good segue into what you were saying in the beginning of like the dark side of the industry and like PR. Um, how come you never thought about going into PR? I have a lot of friends who are like PR people, Chain Story, shout out to Chain Story, who's backing the podcast and who's like, putting in some serious legwork to make this happen. Big fan of PR people, even though sometimes they make my life intense, I'm gonna say, or I should redact what they sometimes make my life. But have you how come you never went down that path?
No, I have done like a bit of, I have dabbled in PR work, and like, but it hasn't really got me that excited. This was like years ago. But you know, I you know, down the line, I may well end up going down that path. It's just that I think I've still got a few more years at least, you know, of being a news hound in me. So,
well, then why do you think that why do you think that's the inevitable path? Because from what I've seen, there is like there's a lot of people that start off as journalists and then eventually make their way into PR, which is an interesting path to that. It feels like this. It's the same as like I fell into journalism. I fell from journalism into PR. How come?
I think I mean the skills are transferable. So you know you're dealing with people a lot of the time. You're trying to sell a story. You've got to have writing skills. You've got to make something readable. You know, it's just like the easy next step, I guess. I mean, what else are we going to do? Be a financial advisor. I think, no, it's just like an accountant. Yeah. A doctor. It's like the next logical step. So yeah, it makes sense. PR and marketing. I mean, I do know other journalists who've gone into sort of like consulting work. And I think that, to be honest, I can see that becoming something quite big for our industry, for journalists. Like, you know, people will want to know more about the crypto world, and because it's so arcane and difficult to understand, they'll like crypto consultants, as it were, people who know a lot and have good contacts in the industry will be valuable.
Yeah, I do see that as like a job. I do see that as a job that already exists. I do think that it's just masqueraded as, because it's such a hyper financialized world. Like it sort of feels like by default, asset managers and investment firms and that sort of stuff just become the de facto consultants rather than just being like actual consultants that offer some sort of reporting or some sort of advice or things like that. But yeah, I wanted to ask you, because we were talking about this before we started recording, which was like the reporting when SBF and FTX took us down. And I think this is like the idea of reporting on things that are really hard to understand and like just happening at breakneck speed. I think is a good intro into what that was like when it happened. Yeah. Do you want to give us the lowdown of what it was like? Because that made a lot of us, like, I remember having to go through court filings for the first time in my life. And just thinking to myself, I would have never thought to have been here. And I have no idea what I'm looking for. I have no idea how to understand this language. And then you also have to add on things that are crypto native that I'm also lost on. Did you suffer through the same?
Yeah, I mean, it was a steep learning curve. It was tough because and things were moving so fast. It was hard to keep up with. But you know, I think that was the main thing. That was the main challenge of it all, was just how quickly it was all moving. But you learn as you go. And luckily, I had a great team when I was doing it, so lots of support. But it was definitely an epic story. I mean, I found some other like big crypto stories of that year. I think it was 2022, wasn't it? That were, you know, the Terra collapse. Like, I remember covering that and saying to my editor, like, I'm sorry, but I don't even understand what an algorithmic stablecoin is and how it went tits up. And he was like, yeah, I don't think anyone really understands the intricacies. And like, that's when I was like, yeah, this covering this space is fucking tough. And then the banking crisis, obviously in 2023, that was probably even more convoluted. But yeah, FTX, I mean, that was just, it happened so quickly, and it was so complicated, and then having to put it into a really into succinct and like entertaining news
Do you reckon
stories.
that's a stain that we're always going to have to live with?
I think what like big news stories that are hard to understand.
No, no, no. Like the FTX and SBF. Obviously, like big news stories that are hard to understand and that are hard to get written and researched. Those are just going to be a staple of our industry. Because I'm also a believer that like there's a bit in us that sort of froth that complication, the complexity of it, and to be able to sort of, I don't know. I talk to people in crypto who are like proud, and I mean, fair enough to you that they're proud to be able to understand these things and communicate these things. But I've always felt like there's a sort of insider outsider sort of feel to it. Like I understand this and I know what's going on, and I can like grasp the concepts. You can't. Uh, I don't know if you've gotten the same feeling when talking to some people. Um, yeah, whether that's journalists or just like general crypto people or asset managers or investors or whoever it
Well,
is.
we have inside knowledge of certain
Not
things.
inside knowledge, but there's this sort of like there's this pride in understanding it from the inside that we
Oh
sort
yeah,
of like nearly put ourselves on a pedestal because we are able to just like understand these really complex like super technical things. Maybe it's just like a random thought that sometimes has come into my mind when I'm chatting to people that they want to be able to, like, I'm a big believer in just like clarity over cleverness, and just when you want to communicate something you want to be as clear as possible rather than being clever. Cleverness obviously comes into play sometimes, but it's much more in the newsroom. I think it should always prize clarity above all.
yeah, yeah.
um
No, I agree. I agree. Yeah, I mean, journalists do have that reputation, for being a bit sort of pompous because they know things that other people don't. Certainly, I've heard complaints from other friends regarding journalists. They've made that. They've hinted that to, not to me, but about other journalists, obviously. Um, but but
I'm glad that you clarified that they're
yeah,
not grilling you about it, but others. So, looping back in, this has been a brilliant conversation.
yeah,
And I always, and you obviously know this by now because you're an avid listener to this show, that I
I
always
am.
end these interviews on two questions, which is, what book are you reading at the moment? And then what book are you recommending, or do you usually recommend? And this neither of these have to be crypto related. I mean, maybe you are reading a crypto book right now, but like when it goes to recommendations, it doesn't have to necessarily be like a Bitcoin book or a crypto book or anything like that. It can be whatever you like to, put in anybody's face or lap.
Yeah, I mean, I'm reading a couple of things at the moment, but this is going to sound so boring and nerdy. I'm reading Empires of the New World, and it's a history book that compares, Spain and Britain's conquests of the Americas, and analyzes them both. I'm not sure I'd recommend that to everyone, but I find it quite interesting. And then, like, what would I recommend to people? I recently got back into Martin Amis, British writer. He's got some great stuff. Money is a great novel of his. Time's Arrow is really good as well. It's a story. It's written backwards. Um, I studied him when I was at college, but I got back into his work recently. So if you haven't, if you're looking for fiction, he's great. Um, he's great. So yeah, I definitely recommend looking, digging into his stuff. He's got lots of novels.
Awesome. Yeah, man. I'm a big fan or I've been getting back into fiction lately. So I appreciate the recommendation. And
Great.
yeah, man, I appreciate the time. This has been a great conversation. It's
Mhm.
nice to, like we were saying, we had talked heaps, but we had never actually talked on screen to each other. So this was
Yeah.
great. And we've advanced in our relationship to the next level.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Hopefully
man,
hopefully
Matt,
see you around the Americas at some point.
definitely. We're in the same neighborhood, so it feels silly to not hang out in person at some point.
Just about 6 hours away on a plane or something.
That's
Not too
nothing,
far.
man. Nothing. All right, man. You have a good one. Thanks a
You
lot.
too. Thanks a lot. Cheers.